On the morning of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I discovered my fiancée Sophie Graham in bed with my best man, writhing passionately in the bridal suite just hours before our ceremony. But instead of calling off the wedding and facing the humiliation of 300 guests, the thousands of dollars spent, and the devastated families, I made a decision that shocked everyone in attendance. I walked down that aisle and married someone else entirely, her sister Daisy, who had been serving as my maid of honor, the woman who had been silently in love with me for years, watching helplessly as I planned a future with her manipulative, unfaithful sister. What followed was a dramatic confrontation that tore apart two families, exposed years of deception and betrayal, and ultimately led me to discover what real love actually feels like. This is the story of how the worst day of my life became the beginning of my greatest happiness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of Sophie's breathless moans echoed through the bridal suite at Willowbrook Gardens, as I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still gripping the bouquet of white roses I had planned to surprise her with before our ceremony. There she was, my fiancée of 3 years, tangled in silk sheets with Jackson Cooper, my best man, my college roommate, the person I had trusted to stand beside me, as I married the woman I thought was the love of my life. Oh God, Jackson, yes. Sophie gasped, her long auburn hair cascading over her bare shoulders as she moved rhythmically above him. Neither of them noticed me standing there in my half-buttoned dress shirt and black suit pants, the boutonniere still pinned to my chest like some cruel joke. The white roses fell from my trembling hands, scattering across the marble floor of the luxury suite. The sound made Sophie turn, and when her emerald eyes met mine, I saw something that shattered me completely. Not shame, not regret, but annoyance at being interrupted. "Benjamin," she said coolly, pulling a sheet around herself without an ounce of embarrassment. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony. It's bad luck." Jackson scrambled to cover himself, his face flushed red with panic. "Ben, man, I can explain. 3 hours," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my heart breaking. "Our wedding is in 3 hours. 300 guests are already arriving downstairs." Sophie climbed off the bed with the same confidence she'd always carried, as if she owned every room she entered. "Oh, please don't be so dramatic, Benjamin. It's not like this changes anything. We can still get married." Jackson was just helping me relieve some pre-wedding stress. The casualness in her voice, the way she dismissed what I had just witnessed, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a moment of weakness or cold feet. This was who she really was, and I had been too blind to see it. "How long?" I asked, my voice gaining strength. "How long has this been going on?" Jackson was fumbling with his clothes, trying to dress quickly. "Ben, it's not what you think." 2 years, Sophie said, matter-of-factly, applying lipstick in the mirror as if we were discussing the weather. "Give or take a few months. Jackson's always been better at certain things than you." The cruelty in her words was deliberate, designed to wound me as deeply as possible. But instead of crumbling, something inside me hardened. I thought about the $75,000 wedding reception downstairs, paid for with my savings and my parents' retirement fund. I thought about Sophie's family, who had flown in from across the country. I thought about the future I had planned, the house we had already bought, the life I thought we were building together. "You know what, Sophie?" I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. "You're absolutely right. This doesn't change anything. We're still having a wedding today." Her confident smirk faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are 300 people downstairs expecting a wedding, and they're going to get one. Just not the one they're expecting." Before either of them could respond, I turned and walked out of the bridal suite, leaving behind the scattered roses and the life I thought I wanted. As I made my way down the hallway, my mind was already racing with a plan that would shock everyone in attendance, including myself. Because there was someone else in this wedding party, who deserved so much better than watching her sister destroy everything good in her path. Someone who had been silently supporting me, believing in me, loving me from afar while I was too stupid to notice. Daisy Graham was about to become the most surprised bride in Willowbrook Gardens history. The story of how I fell for the wrong Graham sister began 4 years ago at Ashwood Valley University's annual charity gala. I was a senior studying business management, working part-time at my uncle's architectural firm, and trying to build a network for my future career. The gala was one of those mandatory social events that promised networking opportunities and looked good on a resume. I remember adjusting my borrowed tuxedo, feeling completely out of place among the wealthy donors and established professionals. That's when I first saw her, Sophie Graham, gliding across the ballroom in a stunning emerald dress that matched her eyes perfectly. She was the kind of beautiful that stopped conversations, with her model-height figure and the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Sophie was surrounded by admirers, but when our eyes met across the crowded room, she smiled and excused herself from her group to approach me. I couldn't believe someone like her would notice someone like me, a middle-class kid from Millbrook Heights, working his way through college. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said, her voice warm and melodic. "I'm Sophie, Benjamin Romano, and you're right. I'm not really the gala type." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Neither am I, actually. I'm only here because my father insisted. He's one of the major donors." She gestured toward a distinguished man in an expensive suit who was deep in conversation with the university president. What I didn't notice that night was the young woman standing quietly by the refreshment table, watching our interaction with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. Daisy Graham, Sophie's younger sister, had been invisible to me in that moment, just another face in the crowd, while I was mesmerized by her sister's radiance. Over the following weeks, Sophie and I began dating. She was everything I thought I wanted: sophisticated, ambitious, and undeniably beautiful. She came from the kind of family I had always imagined joining someday: successful, well-connected, and financially stable. Her father, Robert Graham, owned the largest construction company in the region, while her mother, Patricia, was a prominent socialite who organized charity events for the city's elite. Sophie was studying communications with plans to work in her father's company's marketing department after graduation. She talked about expanding the business, maybe even running for city council someday. Her ambition was intoxicating, and I found myself reshaping my own dreams to fit into her grand plans. But it was during our third date that I first really noticed Daisy. We had gone to Sophie's family home for Sunday dinner, a massive colonial estate in the prestigious Meadowbrook neighborhood. While Sophie spent the evening charming my parents with stories about her internship at a high-end marketing firm, Daisy quietly helped her mother serve dinner and clean up afterward. "Your sister seems sweet," I mentioned to Sophie as we walked through the garden after dinner. Sophie waved dismissively. "Daisy's always been the quiet one. She's studying art therapy or something equally impractical. Nothing like me. She's never been able to handle the spotlight." I glanced back toward the house and caught sight of Daisy through the kitchen window, laughing genuinely at something her father was saying while she dried dishes. There was something authentic about her smile that struck me, so different from Sophie's practiced perfection. Over the next few months, as Sophie and I grew more serious, I found myself looking forward to family gatherings, not just to see my girlfriend, but to observe her sister. Daisy had an entirely different kind of beauty, softer, more natural. Where Sophie commanded attention, Daisy earned it through her kindness and genuine interest in others. She would ask thoughtful questions about my architecture studies, remember small details I had mentioned in passing, and always made sure I felt welcome in their family home. While Sophie would often cancel our dates for social events or networking opportunities, Daisy was the one who would text me updates. "Sophie's running late from her sorority meeting, but dinner's still on, if you want to come early and hang out." I began to realize that some of my favorite moments at the Graham house were the quiet conversations I had with Daisy while waiting for Sophie to get ready. She would show me her art therapy projects, explaining how she planned to work with trauma survivors. Her passion for helping others was genuine and inspiring, so different from Sophie's surface-level ambitions. But I was completely smitten with Sophie's glamorous lifestyle, and the way she made me feel sophisticated and successful just by being with her. I ignored the growing realization that Daisy's company felt more comfortable, more natural. I dismissed the way my heart rate would quicken when Daisy smiled at me, or how I found myself hoping she would be home when I visited. The engagement happened 2 years into our relationship, right after graduation. Sophie had orchestrated the entire proposal, dropping hints about her ring preferences for months, and even going so far as to show me pictures of her dream wedding venue. I proposed at the same charity gala where we had met, with both our families present. It was picture perfect, exactly what Sophie wanted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What I remember most about that night wasn't Sophie's tearful acceptance or the applause from the crowd. It was the look on Daisy's face when Sophie showed off her ring, a mixture of happiness for her sister and profound sadness that she tried desperately to hide. For just a moment, our eyes met across the room, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. That should have been my first real warning sign that I was about to marry the wrong sister. The 2 years between our engagement and wedding day were a whirlwind of planning, career building, and what I thought was laying the foundation for our perfect life together. Sophie threw herself into wedding preparations with the same intensity she brought to everything else, turning our union into what felt more like a corporate merger than a celebration of love. She hired Evelyn Cross, the most exclusive wedding planner in the state, and together they transformed our ceremony into a $75,000 spectacle at Willowbrook Gardens, the most prestigious venue in Ashwood Valley. Every detail was meticulously planned, hand-calligraphed invitations on imported paper, a 7-course dinner prepared by a James Beard Award-winning chef, and a 12-piece orchestra for the reception. While Sophie orchestrated our social debut, I focused on building my career to match her expectations. I took a position at Henderson and Associates, the city's premier architectural firm, working 60-hour weeks to prove myself worthy of partnership track. Sophie made it clear that she expected us to move in the same social circles as her parents, which meant country club memberships, charity board positions, and a lifestyle that required serious financial commitment. I used my entire savings account as a down payment on a house in Meadowbrook Heights, just 3 blocks from Sophie's family home. It was a beautiful Victorian that needed extensive renovation, but Sophie had fallen in love with its potential for entertaining. "We'll need somewhere impressive for dinner parties once you make partner," she explained, already mentally redecorating every room. The financial pressure was enormous, but I convinced myself it was an investment in our future. My parents, Maria and Vincent Romano, had saved for years to contribute to our wedding costs. My father, a high school mathematics teacher, and my mother, a nurse at Millbrook General Hospital, had worked double shifts to give me opportunities they never had. Watching them write that check for $25,000, their entire retirement savings, was both humbling and terrifying. "We believe in you, son," my father had said, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he signed the check. "Sophie's a lucky girl, and we're proud to help you start your marriage right." The weight of their sacrifice pressed on me constantly. This wasn't just about my happiness anymore. It was about honoring their faith in me, and proving that their working-class son could build something lasting with the Graham family's princess. During this time, my relationship with Daisy deepened in ways I didn't fully acknowledge. She had moved back home, after completing her master's degree in art therapy, taking a position at Ashwood Valley Children's Hospital, while saving money for her own place. This meant she was often around during wedding planning sessions, quietly helping with logistics, while Sophie focused on the glamorous decisions. Daisy became my unofficial liaison with vendors when Sophie was too busy with her marketing job at Graham Construction. She would meet contractors at our new house, coordinate with the florist, and handle the dozens of small details that Sophie found tedious. I told myself I was grateful for the help, but the truth was that I looked forward to these moments alone with her. "The roses you picked for the ceremony are beautiful," Daisy told me one afternoon, as we reviewed arrangements at the florist shop. "Sophie has excellent taste. Actually, I chose those," I admitted. Sophie wanted orchids, but roses have always been my favorite. She said it didn't matter, as long as they looked expensive. Daisy's expression softened. "Roses are more romantic anyway. They have history, meaning. Orchids are beautiful but," she paused, seeming to catch herself. "Never mind. I'm sure whatever you two choose will be perfect." These small moments accumulated over months. Daisy remembering that I preferred coffee over tea when we worked late on wedding preparations. Her genuine excitement when I showed her the architectural plans for a community center I was designing pro bono. The way she listened when I talked about my dreams of creating affordable housing, never making me feel foolish for wanting to use my career to help people, rather than just make money. Meanwhile, Sophie's behavior became increasingly demanding. She quit her job 6 months before the wedding, claiming she needed to focus full-time on preparations and finding the right position at a more prestigious company. This meant I was covering all our household expenses plus wedding costs on my junior architect's salary. "Benjamin, you're being ridiculous," she snapped, when I suggested we scale back some of the more expensive wedding elements. "This is our one chance to make a statement in this community. Do you want people to think you can't provide for your wife?" The pressure extended beyond finances. Sophie began reshaping our social calendar around people she deemed useful for my career advancement. She would accept invitations to events I had no interest in attending, and decline invitations from friends she considered beneath our new status. "Jackson Cooper called about getting together this weekend," I mentioned one evening. "Maybe we could have him and Sarah over for dinner." "Absolutely not," Sophie replied without looking up from her wedding magazine. "Jackson's still living in that awful apartment downtown, and Sarah works retail. We need to be associating with partners' wives and established professionals, not your college friends who haven't grown up yet." It hurt to watch Sophie dismiss people who had been important to me, but I rationalized her behavior as social ambition that would benefit us both. I didn't realize she was systematically isolating me from anyone who might question her motives or behavior. The most painful part was watching how she treated Daisy during this period. Despite her sister's countless hours of unpaid help with wedding preparations, Sophie was consistently dismissive and often cruel. "Daisy, can you handle the final menu tasting?" Sophie asked one afternoon. "I have a networking lunch that's actually important." "Of course," Daisy agreed quietly. "Should I take notes on your preferences?" "Just pick whatever. It's not like anyone will remember the food anyway. They'll remember the dress, the flowers, the music, the things that actually matter." I watched Daisy's face fall slightly at the casual dismissal of her efforts. That evening she and I spent 3 hours at the caterer's, carefully tasting each course and discussing wine pairings. Her thoughtfulness about dietary restrictions for elderly guests, and her genuine excitement about creating a memorable meal, made me realize how much care she put into everything she did. By the month before our wedding, I had invested everything I had, financially, emotionally, and socially, into a future with Sophie. The house renovation was nearly complete, the wedding preparations finalized, and my career trajectory aligned with her expectations. Walking away would mean losing not just her, but the life we had built, and the investments our families had made. I was so deeply committed that even the growing voice in my head, questioning whether I was truly happy, felt like a betrayal of everyone who believed in us. The stakes had never been higher, which made Sophie's ultimate betrayal even more devastating, and my decision to marry her sister even more shocking to everyone involved. Little did I know that Daisy had been quietly loving me through all of this, watching me build a life with her sister, while dreaming of what might have been different if I had noticed her first. Looking back now, the red flags were everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs, leading to that devastating morning in the bridal suite. But love, or what I mistook for love, has a way of making you willfully blind to the obvious. Every suspicious moment, every inconsistency, every gut feeling that something wasn't right, I rationalized away with the desperation of a man who had invested too much to consider that he might be wrong. The first major warning sign came 8 months before our wedding, during what should have been one of our happiest moments together. I had just received news that Henderson and Associates was promoting me to senior associate, a huge step toward the partnership track Sophie constantly pushed me toward. I rushed home to our Meadowbrook Heights house, flowers and champagne in hand, eager to celebrate with my fiancée. I found the house empty, which wasn't unusual since Sophie often stayed late at networking events or dinner meetings. But as I walked through our living room, I noticed Jackson's leather jacket draped over our antique armchair, the expensive one Sophie had insisted we buy for entertaining. It struck me as odd since Jackson never visited when Sophie was alone. We always hung out as a group. When Sophie arrived home 2 hours later, she was flustered in a way I'd never seen before. Her usually perfect hair was slightly messed, her lipstick completely gone, and there was a nervous energy about her that immediately put me on edge. "Jackson stopped by earlier," she explained before I even asked, which should have been my first clue. "He wanted to discuss bachelor party plans, and couldn't reach you on your phone." I checked my phone, no missed calls from Jackson. But Sophie was already moving on, gushing about my promotion, and suggesting we open the champagne. In my excitement about the career milestone, I let the inconsistency slide. After all, Jackson was my best friend, and future best man. What possible reason would I have to doubt either of them? The second warning came during our engagement party planning. Sophie had insisted on hosting it at the prestigious Silverdale Country Club, despite my preference for something more intimate. She spent weeks coordinating every detail, from the guest list to the floral arrangements, treating it more like a business networking event than a celebration of our love. "I've invited the Hendersons and the Blackwoods," she announced one evening, referring to my boss and the city's wealthiest construction family. "This is the perfect opportunity to solidify your position at the firm and make connections that will benefit us for years." What bothered me wasn't her ambition. I admired her drive. It was the way she talked about our relationship like a strategic business merger, rather than a romantic partnership. But again, I convinced myself that her practical approach to social advancement would serve us well in the long run. The engagement party itself was beautiful, exactly the kind of sophisticated affair Sophie excelled at orchestrating. She worked the room like a seasoned politician, introducing me to influential people and steering conversations toward my architectural achievements. I should have felt proud, but instead, I felt like a prop in her performance. The most telling moment came when Jackson arrived fashionably late, as was his habit. I watched Sophie's entire demeanor change the instant she spotted him across the room. Her practiced social smile became genuine, her shoulders relaxed, and there was a brightness in her eyes that I realized, with a sinking feeling, I hadn't seen when she looked at me in months. "Jackson," she called out, leaving mid-conversation with Mrs. Henderson to greet my best friend. She hugged him with an intimacy that lasted just a beat too long, her hand lingering on his chest as she pulled away. When she laughed at something he whispered in her ear, the sound was different, more natural, more real than the polished laughter she used with everyone else. I told myself I was being paranoid. Jackson and Sophie had known each other almost as long as we'd been together. They were both naturally charismatic people who got along well. It made sense that they would be comfortable with each other. But throughout the evening, I found myself tracking their interactions, noting how often they sought each other out in the crowd, how they seemed to communicate with subtle glances and inside jokes I wasn't part of. Daisy noticed too. She appeared at my side during one of these moments, offering me a fresh drink and a concerned expression. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. "You look like you're a million miles away." "Just taking it all in," I replied, not wanting to voice my growing unease. "Sophie did an amazing job with all this." Daisy followed my gaze to where Sophie and Jackson were laughing together near the bar. "She did," Daisy agreed, but there was something in her tone, a careful neutrality, that suggested she had observed the same interactions I had. "Daisy," I started, then stopped myself. What was I going to ask? Whether she thought my fiancé was behaving inappropriately with my best friend at our own engagement party. The question felt disloyal to even consider. "It's nothing," I said finally. "Just wedding nerves, I guess." Daisy studied my face for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something that looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she simply squeezed my arm gently and said, "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I mean, if you ever need someone to listen." There was such sincerity in her offer that it caught me off guard. While Sophie was across the room building her social network, Daisy was here, quietly offering genuine support without any agenda. The contrast should have been more meaningful to me than it was. The third major warning sign came 4 months before the wedding, during what was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway to Lakeshore Retreat. Sophie had been working long hours on a marketing campaign for her father's company, and I thought a romantic weekend would reconnect us before the final push of wedding preparations. I had planned everything carefully: a suite overlooking Mirror Lake, dinner reservations at the resort's acclaimed restaurant, and a couple's massage at their spa. But from the moment we arrived, Sophie seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone, and making excuses to step away for important calls. "It's the Riverside Development Project," she explained after her fourth mysterious phone conversation of the day. "There's a crisis with the permits, and Dad needs me to coordinate with the contractors." I knew Robert Graham's business well enough to know that permit issues were handled by his legal team, not his daughter who worked in marketing. But I wanted to trust her,
so I nodded and suggested we take a walk around the lake while she dealt with work issues. That evening at dinner, Sophie's phone buzzed constantly. Each time, she would glance at the screen, with an expression I couldn't quite read, anticipation, mixed with something that looked almost guilty. Finally, after the fifth interruption during our appetizer course, I gently asked if she could put the phone away so we could focus on each other. "This is important, Benjamin," she snapped with more irritation than the situation warranted. "Not everything revolves around your need for constant attention." The harshness of her response stunned me. This was supposed to be our romantic weekend, and I was asking for basic courtesy during dinner. Her reaction felt disproportionate and mean-spirited in a way that was completely unlike the Sophie I thought I knew. Later that night, while Sophie was in the shower, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Without thinking, I glanced over and saw Jackson's name on the screen, along with a preview of his message. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I'd been thinking about." The message cut off there, but my heart started racing. Why was Jackson texting my fiancée at 11 p.m. on our romantic weekend? And what was he thinking about that he couldn't wait to share with her? When Sophie emerged from the bathroom, I mentioned casually that Jackson had texted her. "Oh, probably something about the bachelor party," she said without missing a beat. "He's been asking for input on locations." But there had been something intimate about the tone of that message preview, something that didn't match the casual bachelor party planning explanation. Once again, I swallowed my doubts, and chose to trust the woman I was planning to marry. The pattern continued over the following months. Sophie would disappear for hours with vague explanations about work or errands. She would receive calls that she had to take privately, stepping outside, or into another room. Her mood would shift dramatically depending on who was texting her, becoming animated and secretive in ways that excluded me from her excitement. Most troubling of all, she began picking fights over trivial issues. My choice of wedding songs, the color of napkins at the reception, whether my parents should sit at the head table. These arguments felt manufactured, as if she was creating distance between us deliberately. "Maybe we should postpone the wedding," I suggested one evening, after a particularly vicious argument about flower arrangements. "It feels like we're both under too much stress to enjoy what should be the happiest time of our lives." Sophie's reaction was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not. Do you have any idea how much money has already been spent? How many people have made arrangements? You can't just postpone a wedding like it's a dinner reservation, Benjamin." Her concern was entirely about logistics and appearances, not about our relationship or happiness. But once again, the financial and social pressures she mentioned were real and overwhelming. We had committed to this path, and backing out would devastate both our families financially and socially. The final warning sign came just 2 weeks before the wedding, during our bachelor and bachelorette party weekend. Sophie was going to Miami with her sorority sisters, while Jackson was organizing a weekend in Las Vegas for my party. I wasn't particularly excited about Vegas, but Jackson had insisted it was the only way to properly celebrate my last days of freedom. The night before we were supposed to leave, Jackson called to cancel. "I'm really sorry, man, but something came up with work. Emergency project that can't wait. Can we do something local instead? Maybe just a dinner with the guys." I was disappointed but not surprised. Jackson's consulting job often had unpredictable demands. We settled on a low-key evening at Maplewood Tavern with our college friends. It was actually more my style than Vegas would have been.
But the next morning, while picking up coffee before heading to the office, I saw Jackson's car parked outside the Grandview Airport terminal. I wouldn't have thought much of it. Lots of people use the airport, except that I distinctly remembered him saying his work emergency was local and couldn't involve travel. I called him immediately. "Hey man, I thought your work thing was keeping you in town." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Yeah, it is. Why do you ask? I just saw your car at the airport." Another pause. "Oh, that. I had to drop off a client who was catching a flight." "Yeah, that's part of the emergency project." The explanation felt rehearsed, but I wanted to believe him. Jackson had been my closest friend since freshman year of college. We had been through everything together: failed exams, heartbreaks, family crises, career changes. The idea that he would lie to me about something important was almost inconceivable. But that afternoon, Sophie posted a photo on social media from Miami Beach. She was wearing a new bikini I'd never seen before, looking radiant and carefree in the Florida sunshine. What caught my attention wasn't Sophie. It was the reflection in her sunglasses. There, barely visible, but unmistakably clear, was Jackson's profile. My best friend, who had supposedly canceled our Vegas trip for a work emergency, was somehow in Miami with my fiancée and her girlfriends. I stared at that photo for 20 minutes, zooming in and out, trying to convince myself I was seeing things. But there was no mistaking Jackson's distinctive jawline and the way he wore his hair slightly longer on top. He was there, on Sophie's bachelorette weekend, while lying to me about work obligations. That night, I barely slept. Every rational explanation I could think of fell apart under scrutiny. There was no innocent reason for Jackson to be in Miami with Sophie, while lying to me about his whereabouts. The pieces of all those months of suspicious behavior suddenly began forming a picture I had been desperately trying not to see. But even then, even with photographic evidence of their deception, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a surprise they were planning for the wedding. Maybe Jackson had decided to join the bachelorette party as a joke. Maybe the reflection in Sophie's sunglasses was someone else entirely. I was still telling myself these lies 2 weeks later, as I stood in the doorway of the bridal suite, white roses scattered at my feet, watching the woman I was supposed to marry, in 3 hours, betray me in the most intimate way possible, with the man I had trusted most in the world. Sometimes the heart's capacity for self-deception is so powerful that even the most obvious truths become invisible, until they literally explode in your face. What I discovered in the weeks following that devastating morning in the bridal suite was that my entire relationship with Sophie had been built on a foundation of lies so elaborate and systematic that it took my breath away. The affair with Jackson wasn't a moment of weakness or a recent development born from wedding stress. It was the cornerstone of a calculated deception that had been orchestrated from almost the very beginning of our relationship. The truth started unraveling 3 days after what should have been our wedding day, when Daisy appeared at my apartment door with a manila envelope and tears streaming down her face. I had been staying at my old place, near downtown Ashwood Valley, unable to face the Meadowbrook Heights house that Sophie and I had planned to turn into our dream home. I hadn't eaten in days, hadn't showered, hadn't answered the dozens of calls from concerned friends and family members who wanted to understand what had happened. "I'm so sorry, Benjamin," Daisy whispered as I opened the door. "I should have told you sooner. I should have been braver." Inside the envelope were photographs, text message screenshots, credit card statements, and hotel receipts that painted a picture so damning I had to sit down to process it all. Daisy had been quietly documenting her sister's betrayal for over 2 years, hoping against hope that she was wrong, that there was some innocent explanation for what she was seeing. The affair had started 18 months into our relationship, just 6 months after Sophie and I had gotten serious enough to talk about moving in together. According to the evidence Daisy had gathered, it began at Jackson's housewarming party for his new apartment in the Riverside district. The same party where Sophie had told me she felt sick and wanted to leave early. "I drove her home that night," Daisy explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "But she had me drop her off at the corner, instead of at the house. Said she wanted to walk and clear her head. I thought it was strange, so I followed her." The photos Daisy had taken that night were grainy and distant, shot from her car, with her phone's camera, but they were unmistakably clear. Sophie walking back to Jackson's apartment building. Sophie and Jackson kissing passionately outside his door. Sophie disappearing inside for what the timestamp showed was over 3 hours. "I convinced myself it was a one-time thing," Daisy continued, unable to meet my eyes. "Maybe she was confused. Maybe she needed to get it out of her system before committing to you fully. But then it kept happening." The evidence Daisy had compiled was overwhelming in its thoroughness. Credit card receipts showing Sophie had purchased lingerie from expensive boutiques on days when she claimed to be working late. Hotel room charges from the Grand Sterling Hotel downtown, the same luxury hotel where Jackson often took his business clients. Text message screenshots that Daisy had managed to capture when Sophie left her phone unattended, showing months of intimate conversations that left no doubt about the physical and emotional nature of their relationship. One particular exchange, dated just 2 months before our wedding, made my stomach turn. "Jackson, can't wait until this whole charade is over, and we can stop pretending. Sophie, soon baby." After the wedding, We'll figure out how to handle Ben. He's so invested now, it might actually work in our favor. Jackson, I still think we should just tell him. This is getting complicated. Sophie, no. Trust me, I know him better than you do. The guilt will make him generous in the divorce. Plus I'll get half of everything he's building, including that partnership track at Henderson. Jackson, you're devious. I love it. Sophie, I learned from the best. Reading those messages felt like being punched in the chest repeatedly. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning my entire future around their deception. Sophie had calculated exactly how to maximize her financial gain from our marriage, before destroying it, using my own love and trust as weapons against me. But the revelation that truly shattered my understanding of everything was contained in a folder labeled The Long Game, that Daisy had put together from overheard conversations and pieced together plans. Sophie and Jackson hadn't just fallen into an affair. They had targeted me specifically as part of a broader scheme to elevate their social and financial status. Jackson, it turned out, had been struggling financially since graduation. His consulting business was largely fictional, sustained by occasional freelance projects and help from his family. He had been looking for a way to break into Ashwood Valley's established business community when he identified me as his ticket in. He researched you, Benjamin, Daisy explained, showing me printouts of social media searches and university records that Jackson had somehow obtained. He knew about your family's values, your work ethic, your career potential. He also knew that you had always been attracted to confident, ambitious women. Sophie, meanwhile, had been growing increasingly frustrated with her position at her father's company. Despite her marketing degree and family connections, Robert Graham had made it clear that he intended to leave Graham Construction to his business partner's son, not to either of his daughters. Sophie needed her own path to financial security and social prominence, and Jackson had presented her with the perfect opportunity. Their plan was as simple as it was cruel. Jackson would introduce Sophie to me at the charity gala, knowing I would be attracted to her sophistication and beauty. Sophie would play the role of the perfect girlfriend, while gradually positioning herself to benefit from my rising career. Once we were married, and I had achieved partnership at Henderson and Associates, she would divorce me, claiming infidelity or incompatibility, and walk away with half of my assets and a substantial alimony settlement. Jackson's role was to be my closest friend and confidant throughout this process, ensuring that Sophie had insider information about my career moves, financial decisions, and emotional state. He would also be positioned to comfort Sophie through the difficult divorce, and eventually marry her himself, now that they both had access to the social and financial circles they craved. The bachelor party cancellation wasn't last minute, Daisy revealed, showing me text messages that proved Jackson had never intended to organize a Vegas trip. They planned the Miami weekend months in advance. It was supposed to be their final romantic getaway before Sophie had to go through with marrying you. The photos from Miami that Daisy had managed to obtain through Sophie's sorority connections were devastating. Sophie and Jackson holding hands on the beach, Jackson carrying Sophie into the ocean, the two of them sharing intimate dinners at expensive restaurants. They had spent my bachelor party weekend playing house, while I sat at home, disappointed but trying to be understanding about Jackson's work emergency. There's more, Daisy said quietly, producing a final set of documents that made my blood run cold. They were planning to have you sign some papers during your honeymoon. Investment documents that would give Sophie power of attorney over certain financial decisions. Jackson has a contact at a fraudulent investment firm that would have helped them drain your accounts gradually. The sophistication of their scheme was breathtaking. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. It was a carefully orchestrated con that had been in development for over 2 years. Every milestone in our relationship, every major decision we had made together, every moment of intimacy Sophie and I had shared, had been calculated for its potential to advance their ultimate goal of financial exploitation. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked Daisy, though I wasn't angry with her. I was grateful that someone had been looking out for me, even when I was too blind to see the truth myself. I tried so many times, she said, tears flowing freely. But you were so happy, so in love with her. And I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you'd think I was just jealous of Sophie, trying to sabotage your relationship, because She stopped herself, but I could see the truth in her eyes. Because you what, Daisy?
She looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the envelope that contained the evidence of her sister's betrayal. Because I've been in love with you since the day we met at that first family dinner. Because watching you plan a future with Sophie was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. Because I knew that if I told you the truth, you might think my motives were selfish. The admission hung in the air between us, adding another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. While I had been building what I thought was a life with Sophie, her sister had been silently protecting me, documenting the truth, and suffering in silence as she watched me unknowingly participate in my own exploitation. But there was one final revelation that Daisy had saved for last, and it was the one that finally made everything click into place. "Benjamin," she said, her voice barely audible. "The morning you found them together, that wasn't an accident. Sophie wanted you to catch them." I stared at her, not understanding. "Jackson was supposed to leave before you arrived with the flowers. Sophie had it all planned out. She would confess to a one-time mistake. You would be devastated but would forgive her because of all the money already spent, and the guests already traveling. The wedding would go on, but you would be emotionally broken and completely dependent on her forgiveness. It would give her even more power in the marriage. But Jackson didn't leave when he was supposed to. He fell asleep, and Sophie panicked when she heard you coming down the hall. She couldn't wake him up in time, so instead of a controlled confession about a single mistake, you walked in on them, in the middle of, well, you know." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Sophie's strange calm, when I caught them, her immediate assumption that we would still get married, her complete lack of shame or remorse. It had all been part of the script. Even her betrayal had been calculated for maximum emotional impact and control. I had been living in a carefully constructed lie for over 3 years, surrounded by people who were systematically exploiting my trust, my love, and my financial potential. The only person who had genuinely cared about my well-being was the one I had barely noticed, the quiet sister who had watched it all unfold, while trying desperately to find the courage to save me from a future built on deception. The scope of their betrayal was so complete, so thoroughly planned, that it took me days to fully absorb it all. But along with the devastation came something unexpected, a profound sense of gratitude toward Daisy for her courage in finally showing me the truth, and a growing realization that the woman I should have been paying attention to all along had been right there beside me, quietly loving me through it all. The morning of June 15th dawned with the kind of perfect weather that wedding planners dream about: clear skies, gentle breeze, and that golden sunlight that makes everything look like it belongs in a fairy tale. I woke up at 6 a.m. in my childhood bedroom at my parents' house in Millbrook Heights, where tradition dictated I spend my last night as a bachelor. My mother had prepared my favorite breakfast, and my father sat at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper with the kind of quiet contentment that comes from watching your son achieve everything you'd hoped for him. "Big day, son," he said, looking up from the sports section with a smile that made my chest tight with emotion. "Your mother and I are so proud of you. Sophie's a lucky girl," I smiled back, trying to push down the nagging anxiety that had been building for weeks. Today was supposed to be the culmination of everything Sophie and I had worked toward: the perfect wedding at Willowbrook Gardens, surrounded by everyone we loved, launching us into the life we had carefully planned together. By 10 a.m., I was dressed in my tuxedo and feeling surprisingly calm. The morning jitters had settled into a focused determination to make this day everything Sophie had dreamed of. She had spent months planning every detail, and I was committed to ensuring that nothing went wrong on her perfect day. Jackson had called earlier to confirm that the rings were secure, and that the groomsmen were all ready. His voice sounded normal, maybe even cheerful, which should have reassured me, but somehow didn't. There was something in his tone, a barely contained excitement that seemed disproportionate to his role as best man. "See you at the altar, brother," he had said before hanging up. "Today's going to be unforgettable." At 11:30 a.m., with the ceremony still 3.5 hours away, I decided to surprise Sophie with the white roses she had mentioned loving during one of our earliest dates. It was a romantic gesture that felt important, a reminder of the connection that had brought us together in the first place, before all the wedding planning stress and career pressures. I stopped at Ashwood Valley Florist and carefully selected 24 perfect white roses, asking them to arrange them in a simple, elegant bouquet. The florist, Mrs. Chen, had known me since I was a teenager, and seemed genuinely touched by the romantic gesture. "She's going to love these, Benjamin," she said, adding a delicate white ribbon. "Nothing says true love like roses chosen from the heart." As I drove toward Willowbrook Gardens, I felt more optimistic about our future than I had in months. Maybe the distance I had been sensing from Sophie was just pre-wedding nerves. Maybe today would reset everything between us, reminding us both why we had fallen in love in the first place. The resort was bustling with wedding preparations when I arrived. Catering staff moved efficiently between the ceremony space and reception hall. Florists put finishing touches on the elaborate arrangements Sophie had designed, and early guests were already checking into the hotel. Everything looked exactly as we had envisioned during our countless planning sessions. I made my way to the bridal suite on the 3rd floor, roses in hand, and my heart actually racing with anticipation. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly excited about marrying Sophie Graham. Whatever had been bothering me lately seemed insignificant compared to the magnitude of the commitment we were about to make. The hallway outside the bridal suite was quiet, with most of the wedding party still getting ready in their respective rooms. I could hear faint music coming from behind Sophie's door, jazz, her favorite, and what sounded like laughter. My spirits lifted even more. She was happy, relaxed, enjoying her wedding morning exactly as she should be. I knocked softly and called out, "Sophie, it's me. I have a surprise for you." No response, though the music continued. I tried the door handle and found it unlocked, which struck me as unusual, since Sophie was typically very particular about her privacy, especially when getting ready for important events. "Sophie," I called again, pushing the door open slowly. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride, but I wanted to give you something special." That's when my world exploded. The scene that greeted me was so far beyond my worst fears that my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Sophie was naked from the waist up, straddling Jackson on the suite's king-sized bed, moving with an urgency and passion that I had never seen her display in our 3 years together. Jackson's hands were tangled in her hair, and the sounds they were making left no doubt about what had been happening behind that door. The white roses fell from my hands, as if in slow motion, scattering across the marble floor like the remnants of every naive hope I had carried into that room. The soft thud they made, when they hit the ground, was somehow the loudest sound in the universe. Sophie turned at the noise, and when her eyes met mine, I saw something that completed my destruction. Not shame, not horror, not even surprise. I saw annoyance, irritation at being interrupted. The look you might give someone who had walked in on you during a business meeting, not someone who had just discovered you betraying the most important relationship in your life. "Oh, Benjamin," she said with the same tone she might use to comment on unexpected weather. "You're early," as if this was a scheduling issue, as if the problem wasn't that she was cheating on me 3 hours before our wedding, but that I had arrived at an inconvenient time. Jackson scrambled to cover himself, his face flushed with panic, but Sophie remained calm, almost regal in her nakedness and betrayal. She climbed off him with the same confidence she brought to everything else, completely unashamed of what I had witnessed. "This is not what it looks like," Jackson stammered, reaching for his clothes. "Really?" I heard myself ask, my voice sounding strange and distant. "Because it looks like my fiancé and my best man are having sex in the bridal suite 3 hours before I'm supposed to marry her." Sophie wrapped the silk sheet around herself and fixed me with a look that was somehow both condescending and bored. "Oh, please don't be so dramatic, Benjamin. It's just sex. It doesn't change anything between us." The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. Just sex. 3 hours before our wedding. With my best friend. And it didn't change anything. "How long?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Daisy's evidence. "Does it matter?" Sophie replied, checking her reflection in the mirror and smoothing her hair as if nothing significant had happened. "We're still getting married today. All our guests are here. Everything's paid for. Our families are expecting us to go through with this. A little pre-wedding stress relief doesn't have to ruin anything." The breathtaking audacity of her response, the assumption that I would simply accept this betrayal and proceed with the ceremony, revealed everything I needed to know about how she saw me. I wasn't her partner or her equal. I was a convenience, a means to an end, someone whose feelings and dignity were irrelevant to her larger plans. Jackson was pulling on his clothes with shaking hands, still trying to salvage something from the disaster. Ben, man, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. Sophie didn't want this to happen. I pushed her into it. Stop, I said quietly, and something in my voice made both of them freeze. Just stop. I looked at the scattered roses on the floor, at Sophie's complete lack of remorse, at Jackson's pathetic attempts to shift blame, and felt something inside me crystallize into perfect clarity. You know what, Sophie, I said, my voice steadier than it had any right to be. You're absolutely right. This doesn't change anything. We're still having a wedding today. Her confident smirk faltered slightly. What do you mean? I mean there are 300 people downstairs expecting a wedding, and they're going to get one. My parents spent their retirement savings on this day. Your parents have been planning this for months. Everyone we care about is here. That's what I just said, Sophie replied, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Yes, I agreed, backing toward the door. Except I'm not marrying you. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophie's face went white, and Jackson looked like he might actually faint. There's someone in this wedding party who deserves so much better than watching her sister destroy everything beautiful in her path, I continued. Someone who's been loving me quietly and faithfully while I was too blind to see it. Someone who would never betray the people she claims to care about. You can't be serious, Sophie whispered. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, I replied. Daisy Graham is about to become the most surprised bride in Willowbrook Gardens history. And with that, I walked out of the bridal suite, leaving behind the scattered roses and the life I thought I wanted, ready to claim the happiness I finally realized I deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.